Today's video is for you if you are looking to save money in the kitchen, and one of the ways you're interested in doing this is learning how to bake your own bread. There are 1,000,001 different methods to do this. There's no knead, there's sourdough, there's all kinds of things, artisan recipes, all of this. But what I want to focus on today is something for the very beginner who's never made bread before and wants to know the simplest and best way to do it, so that you can actually do this every week, make it a money-saving habit, and have it become just a part of your everyday routine in the kitchen. Today, what I'm gonna talk about is just what I would recommend to you if we were sitting down, having a cup of coffee together, and you said, hey, what's the best way to get started baking bread? This is exactly what I would tell you to do. We'll just get right into it and walk through it step by step. The very, very first thing that I would have you do is get a bread machine. And I don't ever want you baking in the machine. I actually have a really nice machine that I just got where you can bake in it and it turns out pretty good. But what I would recommend you do is get the cheapest and most basic bread maker, those little, they look like a white cube almost. And we're just gonna use this for kneading the dough and rising it. We're not baking it in there. You don't need any fancy cycles. For all you care, the part that bakes the bread doesn't even work. This is just the absolute best way to get a really good, perfect dough without spending a lot of time in the kitchen. The second thing you're gonna need is instant yeast. You can do this with regular yeast and it will work, but it will take longer, and instant yeast is just really, really simple to work with. There's absolutely no proofing needed. We're just gonna dump everything in together and you'll see that it just makes everything simpler and faster. Don't let the word instant confuse you. You're gonna get a beautiful yeast loaf just like if you had used active dry yeast. It's almost exactly the same thing. It just dissolves faster and works a little bit faster than regular active dry yeast. The way that I do this is I dump each and every ingredient in the bread machine. I don't care what order it goes in. I don't care what touches what. I'm not concerned. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So we are doing 2 3/4 of a cup of all-purpose flour. I'm focusing on making this a really affordable loaf, so I'm not going to use bread flour or any expensive ingredients, just like the basics. I do recommend King Arthur flour. You can get it. Costco has it for a pretty good price in 10-pound bags, just because when you're eating bread, you're basically eating flour, right? So that is one ingredient where having a nice name brand is going to make a difference, but not the end of the world if you can't. This is 2 3/4 of a cup. You'll also notice I'm not weighing my ingredients. I'm not being super, super particular about how I measure. And the reason for that is we are gonna take a look at the dough after it mixes. If it looks right, it looks right. If it doesn't, we'll add a little more flour or a little more water. It's not a big deal, right? We don't need to get super hysterical about all this. All right, so now I'm gonna put some vegetable oil in here. You need a tablespoon. Now I know a lot of you don't like to cook with vegetable oil, and that's fine. I think using an oil keeps it a little tiny bit softer. But again, butter's fine, olive oil's fine, no biggie. Okay, now I'm gonna do a little bit of sugar, just a tiny bit. I said a tiny bit, but really it's 3 tablespoons. And the bread doesn't taste sweet. It just makes it kind of familiar. Like if you eat Wonder Bread, that has a lot of sugar in it. This is not going to be as sweet as Wonder Bread. There's no sweetness to it. It just adds a little bit of flavor. Now I'm into the salt. Just doing plain old, this kind of world's cheapest salt. And this is 1 1/4 teaspoons. And then finally the yeast. I'm saying finally as if it matters the order you put it in. It doesn't matter, trust me, just throw that in anywhere. This is a special teaspoon that is 2 1/4 teaspoon, which is the equivalent to a packet. And that makes dealing with this yeast just a lot simpler. And this comes in like a vacuum sealed sort of brick. You open it up, air gets into the container, and then after that, the container is kind of useless. So I just pour it into a 1-quart mason jar, put a reusable plastic mason jar lid on it, and then this whole thing goes in the freezer. And it's just super, super handy. This will last a really long time. And I will link for you guys where to get that yeast in bulk. It's really affordable. You can get it right on Amazon. Okay, so now everything's in my bread machine. Yours is gonna look different if you have a really basic model, but the basics of it are very similar. Your machine will have some type of cycle that says either knead or dough. What you really want is one that says dough, because that is gonna mix it, knead it, and then it's going to slightly warm up in here so that it rises perfectly. So like if your machine says wheat bread, white bread, just ignore that. That is a full bake cycle. We don't want that. We're just doing the dough. So I'm gonna hit select course, and this is just gonna change the arrow. And when dough is selected, I'm gonna start it. Now, this is about to start mixing. You can't walk away just yet. And that's because, like I talked about, you always need to take a look at that dough and make sure that it's not too dry and not too wet. What we want it to be is smooth, stretchy. I don't want to see any bits of dry ingredients that haven't gotten incorporated, and I don't want to see a really wet texture where it's almost like batter and it's sticking to the sides or sticking to the bottom. So this machine has a preheat cycle where it's just quickly getting all of the ingredients to the same temperature in case you have anything cold. So I'm gonna let that run, and then I'm gonna come back and show you once it starts mixing exactly what we're looking for. So this has started mixing, and right away we can see that we're getting the dough is coming together really nicely right here. And every now and then what you might need to do is get a really small spatula, or any kind of spatula really, and just kind of get in the corners, especially if you have more of the like square layout of the bread machine, you can have problems in the corners. But this just takes a second. Looking at this, it doesn't seem, it's definitely not too dry, how everything is incorporated. It also doesn't seem too wet. Let me just feel it. So it's a little tiny bit sticky. So what I'm gonna do is take just a teaspoon of flour, truly a teaspoon, sprinkle it on top. It being a little bit sticky is not a big deal. I'm just gonna see if I like this better. Like I don't want it sticking to my hands like this, but this really isn't bad. Even without the flour, this would have been okay. Okay, and then just use the spatula a little bit. And this is all you have to do. So once you're happy with the consistency of the dough, which you will get way more comfortable with over time, the machine will knead this perfectly, and then it will switch over to a rising cycle. And in an hour and a half from this point, we are gonna have a fully risen, really, really pretty dough that's gonna be easy to shape and give us a great loaf. But the great part about this bread machine is we don't have to worry if we're over kneading or under kneading or where we're rising it or anything like that. It takes care of all of that for us. So all that's gonna be left for us to do in an hour and a half is shape, rise again, and bake. So 1.5 hours have passed since we let this bread machine kind of knead the dough and do its thing. And we have a really pretty, nicely risen dough inside here. And all we need to do now is shape it. Now, there is a specific way to shape sandwich bread, but that does not mean that you have to get hysterical about doing it perfectly. I'm going to show you how we shape the dough, but if you mess up, it really isn't a big deal. So follow along the best you can and just don't freak out about mistakes. You're still going to have a loaf of bread in the end. So what I'm going to do here is just pull this out. There's a saying that goes, it's called shoulders in, head down, and that is going to help you remember the best way to get started when you're shaping. And bread machines have this like really nice kind of non-stick inside, so everything comes out very easily. Use your loaf pan as your guide. What you want is the short side of your dough to be as long as the long side of your loaf pan. So let me just show you what I mean by that. We're just kind of stretching this out really roughly. This is not, it's not going to be even. It doesn't have to be even. It's not going to be a perfect rectangle. It doesn't have to be. Just do not freak out about this part. One thing I do want you to do is spray your loaf pan really well. This is a loaf pan by USA Gold. I always say that wrong. That's not what it's called. Gold Touch. There's another brand I kind of like that's USA something, but this is Gold Touch and it's my favorite. It does the best job of like really browning the inside of the loaf. You can only get them on Williams Sonoma or directly from the manufacturer, and that's annoying. But it's a really good brand, but make sure you spray it well with nonstick spray. It's really annoying when it sticks. And so now you can see that these are relatively the same length here and here. So we have this stretched out here. Remember we said shoulders in, head down. This is shoulders in like this. And then here's the head, head down. This is how it starts out. And then we just roll it into a log. If it sticks a little bit, that's okay, just pull it up. Don't worry about this looking perfect. It will not look perfect. It's gonna rise again, and that's when a lot of it is gonna smooth out and you'll see its final shape. So I'm gonna kind of pinch this closed and then flip these up. And as I flip up, I'm pinching the seam closed.
Thank you.
You will get better at this with practice. The idea is that I don't have a seam sticking out anywhere on the sides or on the bottom.
Cheers.
And then when you flip this over, just kind of adjust it a little bit. And you can see how it's going to fit in here nicely. Okay, so this is just going to go in here.
Cut.
And then I'm going to cover this with plastic wrap. You have to spray your plastic wrap, or else as the dough rises and presses up against it, it'll stick. When you go to pull it off, you'll ruin the whole loaf. I've done it before. I've tried to skip that step or use like a damp towel. It's not worth it. Just use the sprayed plastic wrap. If you have a really good beeswax wrap that you like, that can work. I should do that, but I don't. I find this to just work better. But if you have one that you like, actually let me know, because I would love to move away from having to use this every time. So this is just gonna get covered like this, and it's gonna rise again. You know it's done when it looks basically like a loaf of bread. So you can leave this out on the counter and it will take a little bit over an hour. I'd say like an hour and a half, sometimes even 2 hours, depending on how warm or cool your kitchen is. But what I do is I take my oven and I turn it on just for like 30 seconds. Like I'm not preheating the oven, I'm just very slightly warming it up. Then I turn it off, put this in here, and I always set a timer to check on it in 30 minutes because you will be surprised how quickly it goes in a nice warm space. And then that also helps me remember not to preheat the oven with it in there, because that is also not ideal. So I'm gonna tuck this in the oven, let it rise, and I will come back to this once it is ready to bake. So this only took about 40 minutes of rising in a warm but turned off oven. And you can see here that it's risen above the loaf pan, but it's not super high. It's gonna rise a tiny little bit more once it hits the heat of the oven. But as you're looking at it, it looks dramatically different. It looks like a raw loaf of bread, right? If you come to it and it's kind of risen and it's even with the loaf pan, that's not enough. It really needs to be at least an inch, even 2 over the edge of that pan for it to be fully risen. You'll see here why having the plastic wrap really well greased is so important, because we want this to just lift up without disturbing this loaf at all. What I'm gonna do to make this loaf prettier is to sprinkle a little bit of flour on top and rub it in. That's just the cheapest way to kind of decorate it. But if you wanted to, you can definitely do an egg wash with a beaten egg white and a little bit of water. You can brush it with melted butter when it comes out of the oven, or you can just leave it plain. It's really fine. But this is just a little tiny bit of all-purpose flour. I'm gonna rub it without squishing down. And then this is ready to go in the oven for about 40 minutes. Really, I don't want to say 40 minutes because it varies a lot. Sometimes my loaves look ready at 30, 35. Sometimes it takes more like 40. So I'm going to set the timer for 30 minutes at 350 and we will check on it then. helpful, but most of all, I hope you found this easy and doable for you. I want you to see that bread baking, especially when you're using instant yeast in a bread machine, is so easy. It takes time, but it doesn't take too much hands-on time. It is honestly just dumping things into the machine, giving it a 30-second check before it starts kneading, shaping it, letting it rise, and those parts are kind of fun, and then baking it. And you don't have to have that ugly bread machine bread that you'll get that's like a block that comes out. You can have a really beautiful homemade loaf with just that little extra step of shaping it and letting it rise in the pan. So I'm gonna link all the things I recommend to get you started. If you buy all of these things and copy this method, you are not going to fail. You are going to have great homemade bread. Once you get comfortable with it, I really recommend doubling your recipe and letting that machine knead it for you, and then freezing one loaf so that you're not having to do this process as often. But I hope you find it enjoyable and not a chore and easy. And just check below this video in the description box for links to what you need, links to my recipes, and that's it. Thanks for watching. If you have questions, let me know, but I don't think you will. I think you will have a really easy time with this and just enjoy it. Bye.